Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking an absolutely massive 19th century scientific mystery that literally fractured the medical world. The true nature of hypnosis. I mean, just imagine being a doctor over a century ago. You're suddenly encountering patients who are entering these strange, deep, trance-like states. They're exhibiting mind-bending physical symptoms like localized paralysis or even full-blown cataleptic rigidity. You'd probably be asking yourself, what is actually happening here? Is this all just in the patient's head? Is it a purely physical, physiological reflex, or is it something else entirely? Well, today we're going to see how a young Sigmund Freud stepped right into the middle of an epic clash between two intensely competing medical theories, the psychological camp and the physiological camp, and how his brilliant synthesis forever changed our understanding of human psychology. Okay, let's dive into this. We'll be looking at the hypnosis skeptics, the psychological suggestion model, the physiological nervous system, Freud's bridge with autosuggestion, and finally, the ultimate mind-body connection.
Section 1. The hypnosis skeptics.
To really wrap our heads around this debate, we've got to start with the historical context. Back in the late 19th century, the heavyweights of the German medical profession were not having it. They actively dismissed hypnotism. Early critics essentially tried to write the whole thing off as a giant scam, just a mix of overly gullible doctors and patients who were totally faking it. But, as more and more serious researchers firmly testified to the reality of hypnosis, those critics had to shift their tactics. So they started arguing that hypnosis was actually a highly dangerous threat to a person's mental health. Some skeptics went so far as to dramatically label it an experimentally induced psychosis. They genuinely believed it was this intense, severe disruption of the mind, caused entirely by the doctor playing around with things they didn't understand. So, the crucial point is how Freud brilliantly disarmed those skeptics. He basically looked at the medical establishment and said, the existence of occasional harmful outcomes in hypnosis no more invalidates its therapeutic usefulness than isolated deaths under chloroform anesthesia invalidate the use of chloroform in surgery. Right? It's a fantastic comparison. He pointed out that surgeons using chloroform see complications all the time, yet nobody was trying to ban chloroform. So why ban hypnosis just because a few inexperienced observers were scared of it? Freud argued that when it's applied skillfully, hypnosis wasn't inherently dangerous at all. It was a completely legitimate therapeutic tool, and calling it a psychosis was just fear-mongering.
Section 2. The psychological suggestion model.
All right, so with the worst of the skeptics somewhat sidelined, the doctors who actually supported hypnosis could finally get down to figuring out how the heck it worked. But here is where they split into two fiercely opposing camps. The first major camp was championed by a guy named Bernheim, and he was all about the psychological model. To Bernheim and his followers, everything boiled down to the power of suggestion. They defined suggestion as an idea introduced from the outside that the subject just totally accepts as if they thought of it themselves. According to this camp, every single thing that happened during a hypnosis session was strictly a psychological effect. It was just the patient's mind unconsciously following the doctor's script. But as you can probably guess, this psychological model raised a massive, deeply troubling question. Because if Bernheim is completely right, if it's all just suggestion, what does that mean for the dramatic physical symptoms they were seeing in hysterical patients? Things like real unexplained paralysis. Well, it meant that those physical symptoms might just be artificial products of the doctor's own unconscious expectations. And that is a huge deal. It would literally invalidate years of objective scientific observation. It meant doctors weren't actually discovering natural laws of hysteria, they were just unintentionally commanding their patients to act paralyzed, and the patients were obliging.
Section 3. The physiological nervous system.
And this brilliantly illustrates the real crux of the debate. You have Bernheim's mind-first approach sitting directly across from Charcot's body-first approach. Charcot and his team at the Salpêtrière Hospital were completely focused on the physical body. Charcot insisted that, at least in cases of what he called major hypnotism, these phenomena were grounded in genuine physiological changes happening completely outside of the patient's conscious awareness. He pointed to three distinct physical stages of hypnosis that featured dramatic bodily phenomena, like heightened neuromuscular excitation that could be physically measured.
Now, Freud steps into this mess and recognizes that the purely psychological camp had a major blind spot. He presented this incredible counterargument based entirely on anatomy. During the lethargic phase of hypnosis, Charcot's team found that if you applied even a slight physical pressure to specific muscles, it caused highly organized contractions. Freud looked at this and pointed out something so simple but so profound. Human consciousness literally doesn't possess a map of its own nerve anatomy. Since the patient's conscious mind doesn't know how complex nerves are distributed under the skin, there's no way these highly specific contractions could be the result of a psychological suggestion. They had to be genuinely physiological.
On top of that, Freud brought up these incredibly relatable, everyday anomalies that totally stumped the purely psychological camp. Imagine a patient staring at a bright light during a routine eye exam, and they unexpectedly fall straight into a hypnotic state. Or think about a baby being gently rocked to sleep, or an animal becoming hypnotized just by being held perfectly motionless. In none of these scenarios is someone whispering a verbal suggestion or setting an expectation, right? These examples proved absolutely that hypnosis can and does happen without any verbal suggestion or prior expectation at all. It can trigger purely through the body's physical pathways.
Section 4. Freud's Bridge. Autosuggestion.
So we have this massive divide. Bernheim's psychological suggestion on one side, and Charcot's physiological reflexes on the other. Freud realized that picking one extreme or the other just left too many unanswered questions. He needed a bridge, and his masterstroke was a concept that perfectly synthesizes the two: autosuggestion, or indirect suggestion. Unlike direct suggestion, where a doctor verbally implants an idea into your head, autosuggestion works differently. It starts with a purely physical external stimulus. That stimulus produces a physical condition in the body, which then automatically generates a symptom without any deliberate mental intervention.
Let's move to and see how this builds step by step, using one of Charcot's actual experiments. Step 1. You have the external stimulus. Charcot lightly strikes the patient's arm. Step 2. This purely physical action causes a physiological condition to arise, a very real, localized sensation of pain or fatigue in that specific arm. Step 3. This physical feeling of fatigue automatically generates the symptom. The arm actually becomes limp and paralyzed. Do you see what's happening? The doctor never told the patient to be paralyzed. The patient's nervous system just automatically reacted to the physical state of fatigue by producing that symptom.
Freud really wanted to emphasize that this chain reaction of autosuggestion proves hysterical symptoms are fundamentally real. They contain an objective factor that is completely independent of the physician's will. It isn't just a parlor trick. By finding this objective factor, Freud actually validated the very real suffering of these patients. They weren't just faking it or acting out a script. They had a real condition, driven by an internal tendency toward this kind of indirect, physical to mental chain reaction.
Finally, Section 5, the mind-body connection.
By building this bridge between the two camps, Freud did so much more than just solve a debate about hypnosis. He was laying the groundwork for how we understand the whole mind-body connection today. His ultimate conclusion was that our nervous system operates as a deeply interconnected two-way street. Because our nervous processes are so intrinsically linked, influence flows in both directions. The purely mental idea of sleep can actually produce real, physical muscular fatigue. And conversely, pure physical fatigue can literally induce the mental state of sleep.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how Freud completely redefines the word suggestion itself. He concluded that pitting psychology against physiology is, at the end of the day, totally meaningless. Suggestion isn't just some magic trick overriding the brain. It is the mutual activation of mental states according to associative laws. It's the whole shebang working together. Whether a trance is triggered by a doctor's voice or a bright light, it activates the exact same underlying interconnected network of biology and consciousness.
Which leaves us with a pretty profound realization about who we are. Freud argued that you simply cannot rigidly separate the cerebral cortex, the mind, from the rest of our physical nervous system. So I want to leave you with this question to ponder as we wrap up. If a simple physical action can so profoundly alter our mind, and a purely mental idea can so completely alter our physical body, can we ever truly separate human consciousness from our physical biology? It's a wild thought that completely blurs the line between mind and body. Thanks for joining me to explore this incredible piece of scientific history.